Welcome to Dune Chapter by Chapter. I'm Dominic. So in the last video, the chapter that I talked about was where Fade is in the gladiator ring and he's putting off this big show, and in front of him, watching him, is Count Fenring and his wife and all of that, and how that was almost like an assassination attempt against Fade, but it ended up making him look more heroic and things like that. So it's kind of like a plan within a plan. So now in this chapter, we're back on Arrakis with Paul and Jessica, and they're with the Fremen troop, and the Fremen troop has brought them back to one of their hidden sieges. And so in this chapter, we get a real snapshot of everyday life with the Fremen, what they do, what their day-to-day routines are, and things like that. So the first thing that really hits Paul is the smell of the siege. It stinks in there. It doesn't smell good at all because you have all these still suits that are recycling basically human waste. You know, all the sweat and feces and urine and all that stuff gets recycled, and mixed in there is all these other smells. And one of the other strong smells mixed in there is the smell of the spice melange. The spice melange just permeates everything in there. And so then what else happens in this chapter is we get to see the repercussions of his battle with Jamis, his fight to the death that he had with Jamis. Because now we get to meet Jamis's wife, Harah. And so in the Fremen customs, so if you defeat a guy in combat, his wife and his kids are yours. So that's actually how Jamis got his wife, Harah. In the first place was he defeated or killed the old husband that she had in combat, and then took Harah and one of her sons as his own. And then now him and Harah had a child together. So now Paul has to do the same thing. The same thing is expected of him. And it's interesting because Harah doesn't show any animosity or hatred or anger or anything like that towards Paul, someone who basically just killed her husband. And this is just the way it is. This is the custom of how things are done in amongst the Fremen. So Paul's given a choice now of either taking her right now as his wife or as a servant. And he has 1 year to make up his mind. Once that 1 year is up, if he hasn't taken her as a wife, she's free to pursue someone else. And what's interesting is Paul really can't wrap his head around the idea that she doesn't seem affected by her husband's death, or she's not mad at Paul. And she explains that, well, you were, Jamis was always quick to temper, and you were Jamis's friend, and you gave water to the dead, kind of thing. Even something that she herself couldn't do. So it's kind of a very strange custom, to kind of wrap your head around. But that's how it is with the Fremen. So the other thing is now Paul can't find his mother. His mother is gone with Chani. Or the other thing, I'm jumping ahead of myself, is Jessica can, with her Bene Gesserit senses, when they first go into the siege, she can separate all the different smells and identify them what they are. So she can sense that they're making plastics and repairing still suits, and all that stuff is going on in here. She kind of lists that off. And it's a way to kind of she almost did it as a way to kind of put Paul at ease with, I guess, all the different smells going on in this place. So what Paul does is he decides to take Harah as his servant for 1 year. And then, but with that, he's always going to be responsible in some way for her and her kids. So then he asks Harah to show him to their quarters, where their quarters are and stuff like that. And on the way, you kind of this is where you get to see a snapshot of Fremen life in the siege. And they have to be ready to move at any minute, the Fremen. That's how they kind of live in this environment, because the Sardaukar and the Harkonnens are constantly hunting the Fremen and constantly out to destroy them. So that's something they're always aware of. So as she's taking them to her quarters, she points to where they fix still suits, where they manufacture the still suits, and also where they make the plastics and dew collectors. And Paul doesn't know what a dew collector is, so he asks her, like, what is a dew collector? And Harah finds this question kind of odd, because to her it's such an everyday thing that it wouldn't occur to her that there are planets where you wouldn't need it. Like Caladan, you wouldn't need it, obviously, because it's a water planet. So she explains to him it's a way that they water the plants that they have put in their like their gardens. The name of what they call it now kind of escapes me, but basically it's a plastic that turns color in the sunlight, and then as the sun goes down, it rapidly cools and condenses, and water condenses on it and trickles down and waters the plants. So that's how they accomplish it. That's how they, that's their slow process that they're going through to terraform the planet Arrakis. And the other interesting thing in this chapter is we also, the Fremen get news back that Liet is dead. And this really angers Paul, angers all the Fremen, that the Harkonnens kind of try to make it look like it was a Thopter accident, and that's how he died. And, Paul's mad about this because the reason why Liet is dead in the first place is because he helped Paul and Jessica escape from the Harkonnens. And it's kind of foreshadowing the revenge that Paul wants to get against the Harkonnens for all the stuff that they've done. And, and even the Fremen are upset. And then he realizes that, again, it's reinforced in this chapter that Liet is the father of Chani, and Chani's his daughter. So you also have that going on. Now, the other thing is not only do we also get a look at the, Fremen way of life with how they live and how the sieges work and how they always have to be on the move and things like that. Kind of get a snapshot of the Fremen children in this as well, because Harah takes Paul to their quarters, and then Paul, asks Harah to get him something to eat, and so she goes, and then he sees these two young boys staring at him very ferociously, and they got their hands on their crysknives, and then he realizes, well, this is James's two sons, and then he remembers all the stories that the Fremen children, are actually very vicious and violent and ferocious fighters like the adults. Because if you remember earlier on in the story, they were warned, Paul was warned that, you probably won't be allowed to mix it up with the Fremen kids because they can be very savage, very violent, and brutal. And so Paul, seeing these two boys, he can sense that and realize that, yeah, no joke, they are going to be, they are ferocious fighters. And now the other thing that he also notices in this is how different this world is from the one he came from. Because he notices that none of the food, nothing is has to be looked over with a poison snooper or anything like that. But at the same time, he can detect many poisons, very deadly ones and slow ones, all that in the siege. So he's aware that there's a lot of deadly things going on here. And now the one last thing I wanted to talk about concerning this chapter is, after reading this chapter, how are they going to do this in the film? Because you remember, it's a woman of color that was cast as Harah. So Paul is played by a white guy in the movie. So, you can see where I'm going with this, how this is, I can see this, if they do it accurate, like the book in the film, I can see all kinds of articles being written about how this is completely racist and a terrible scene and all that. People who, have never read the book and don't understand the context of this situation. So I can see that happening. So as I was reading this chapter, I was wondering that, how is this going to work? How is this going to play out? That's the thing I hope. I hope with this movie that even though, they some of these story elements, I guess, I don't think they're problematic, but, there's people out there that do, that they try to stick as close as they can to the story. So Liet dies the same way in the movie. that Liet dies in the book. That's what I'm hoping to keep it. And then this scene stays the same regardless. And because, you know, all these like identity politics kind of like shackle storytelling, in my opinion. So I'm hoping they don't try to soften or rewrite all these scenes so they're not problematic anymore in this movie. But I was thinking that when I read this chapter, how that's going to play out in the film. So interesting stuff. So that's everything I got to say in this video. Let me know what you think in the comments section, and I will see you at the next one.